morning. My name is Luc Cloudmans, and I would like to talk about how to work with outdated hardware without the necessity of throwing it all away and starting all over again. So, in essence, saving money and work time, saving money and work time. Yeah. Next slide, please. Is that? Yes. Yeah. Anyway, I study civil engineering at home. I'm here for a year and I really enjoy history, identifying problems in daily life and how they would go around in solving those things. And that's why I've chosen to talk about this. So, solving this is a case of multiple phases, and phase one is actually the car. So, what caused the problem? When you have a design, you design it to specific regulations. Let's say you've got a road, you want a road to work properly, so you say, hey, I want this to be 2 lanes wide, I want this to be able to take 10,000 cars a day, etc., etc. But if you design this in the 70s, nowadays you've got different problems. For example, you've got more public transport right now, more bikes, but still the road is still made for 4 lanes of cars. That doesn't really work out anymore. New innovations, applications, all that stuff, they can all cause these problems. Cars will need to have a large investment, which is basically worthless right now. Or so you think. Next one, please. So, acknowledging it is the part 2 of the battle, which is you realize, hey, this is not working anymore. I need a new design. I need to change this, but I don't have a lot of money. And that's often the problem in engineering. You see you have a problem, you know how to solve it, but you just don't have the money to solve it. So what can you do? You can just throw it all away and start all over again. It costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, and especially in civil engineering, you don't want to close down a road if you don't have to. People get angry, stores make less money, ambulances can't reach the destination quickly enough, for example, etc. So both they have a good side and a bad side, of course. Sometimes you need to throw something away. Sometimes it just doesn't work anymore, but most of the time you can work with it. So I will not say that my method is per definition the best, but it should be looked at more. So the challenge can arise from 5 different reasons. Internal replacement is basically let's say you've got something that's designed to do A 10 times a day, and internally someone designed something to do something which can do it 20 times a day. Now, of course, the second design is better, but you still have the first design. And what do you do with that? No one really knows. But you can keep it, replace it, and make it into something better. You have also internal pressure, which is you don't have a new design yet, but someone is saying from higher up, or the public, hey, this isn't working, fix it. External pressure, it's a much harder one, which gives you a very short time to make a new design, and which often leads to disregarding of original product. Basically, an external company or an external nation has developed something which causes you to be at a very big disadvantage, which means you have to solve it as quickly as possible. It's also the hardest one to solve. The fourth, design shortcoming. It would say it's the hardest one to solve because you've already made a bad design. But a bad design can still be saved by using it in a different way or by making it compatible in a different way. In usage, it's a bit of everything. Eventually, sometimes, again on the road, when more people start cycling on it, it's not because of internal issues or external pressure, it's because people want to cycle more, for example. And you need to cater to that. Solving it, this is of course the longest, often the most difficult part of the challenge. First, you can solve it in multiple ways. I will give examples of this, by the way, so don't worry. Channeling it away, which means, the road it more and more. But I can also say, hey, please come and use this road. This one is quicker. You still have the old road, but it's not as overly used anymore. You can also do a vertical upgrade. Like this? Okay, better? Then you have the two upgrade paths. The vertical one, which means, for example, you replace a road, make it into an asphalt road and have more people be able to use it. The horizontal one, which would, lateral, which would be replacing the road as not being a road anymore, but having it changed into a walkway or a bus road. So you can't drive on it anymore, but it handles just as many people as before. Then the two least good ones are just denying or ignoring the existence of the problem, which I will come back to later, which is of course not very smart, but it costs nothing at all. And scrapping or storing your units, which is also, it doesn't cost anything at all, but you're left with nothing anymore. So the last two are the worst, but they're an option. So, as I said, my examples, I begin with the things that I am most proficient in, which is history, especially the 20th century. So this is a good example of how something that is become unusable through external pressure has to be replaced, and people, instead of upgrading it or scrapping it entirely, just use it for a different problem. So in 1939, the Germans, of course, invade Poland, and they realized that tanks are actually not that good. Yeah, it's working. Yeah, sorry. So it is stuck with, let's say, 10,000 of these tanks, which are not good enough anymore. They can't be used anymore. So what do they say? Hey, we can't put bigger guns on it. We can't put more armor on it. It just doesn't work. It's too small for this. So another part of the army says, hey, we don't have very good mobile artillery. How about we take those on the left, and turn them into the ones on the right? That turned out to be a very good way of taking something that's basically useless and making it into something highly successful. 700 of those were produced, amongst other variants. So a very useless thing, but I'm sorry. A highly successful thing was created out of something that was useless. The next one, please.
Okay.
Staying with the Germans, we have the next class, which would replace the ones we just talked about. But this one was also outdated when the war got going in 1940 in Western Europe. So first, they started out with a very basic, very focused tank, focus on tank killing, which turned out to be okay for the time, but as time went on, as it became 1941, 1942, it just couldn't do anything anymore. So there were two camps. One said, hey, let's just keep putting on more armor, give it a better engine, give it a better gun, etc., 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 and that will work out. Which it did for about 2 years, 1 year. And then they began realizing that the tank started sinking into the mud. The gun wasn't big enough, it just didn't work anymore. The other camp, the one on the right, they had a right idea. Instead of the vertical upgrade path, they chose the lateral one, which is sidestep the problem, still use the same problem, but do it in a different way. This was met with a lot of commentary at the beginning, because this requires a very different approach to your strategy. While the middle one is basically the same as the left one, but better. It doesn't require any other upgrades, it doesn't require any other training or anything like that. But the one on the right, it does. But what turned out, by doing the thing on the right, you slash your costs. The one on the right costs about a third of the one in the middle, and it was much more successful. Eventually, about 20,000 of the ones on the right were built, and only
3 to 5,000 in the middle were upgraded from the one in the left. Both, of course, became successful in their own way, but the one on the right literally redefined the German doctrine in a later war. So much so that it was still used in 1967. So let's move away from the war and go to a more modern example. This is a very good one, how internal pressure demanded change. So the European Union sets emission codes for their diesel buses and big diesel engines, called Euro 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6 codes. The Arnhem City Hall, they wanted to be ahead of the curve and already comply to Euro 6 before Euro 4 even came into effect. We're talking about around 2010, around that time. So, the engineers were stuck with a, not the engineers, I'm sorry, the bus company was stuck with a problem. Hey, we can buy an entirely electric bus, didn't work out, you had to drive too long of a distance, they were too expensive, etc. Or we can fit very expensive exhaust modifications, which would eventually also become outdated. So instead of that, they decided to actually replace the engine itself. They fuel it now with a gas made from sewage, which is of course almost free because everyone creates sewage. And it also doesn't emit certain nitrogen compartment, certain nitrogen, what are they called? Nitrogen particles that normal diesel engines do produce. So instead of a temporary fix of getting a new exhaust fix system which you would have to replace in 10 years' time, you get a new engine which just doesn't create it at all. So less pollution and cheaper fuel, but at the same time you still comply to the requirements set by Arnhem. Next one, please. This one is more local, and I think you guys have all been to this road. It's Via Fori Imperiali. It was created in the 1930s by the fascist government as a display of their vanity, as a display of their military might. And well, back then it was a parade ground and people weren't allowed to use it publicly, and it wasn't used like it is now as a tourist hotspot. But after the war, Rome began to motorize a lot more. They began buying Vespas, they began getting more and more buses, more and more trucks, more and more cars. And eventually there's a very wide road. Well, you can see it's not really designed to actually be used as a main traffic artery. So now, it's not really in use anymore. It's closed off and only a few cars use it a day. And now you have a very wide part of the city not being used. So the city doesn't seem to acknowledge it. They use it for the buses, they use it for government transportation, but not as it could be used. So the way of ignoring the problem is actually only makes the traffic problem worse. Because if you go into the city, you just keep waiting. The public transport is very bad, and there are cars everywhere, so no one is going anywhere fast. And the last one, which is the most depressing one actually, in the 1960s, American car companies, they were designing very bad cars, which were very unsafe, very unreliable, etc. So a young lawyer from America, he wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed, and it turned into a very, how would I put this, it would basically put a bomb under the car construction company, because everyone in the US finally realized, hey, these car companies, they are making very bad cars, they are very dangerous, and they are not dangerous because it's impossible to make them safe, it's because it's expensive to make them safe. So the people, they start demanding change. They want their cars to be safe, to be better at fuel, etc. But Detroit, the car companies, they start lobbying at politicians, they start trying to discredit the man, so much so that it takes about 20 years before the airbag and other safety standards become mandatory, after the presidency of Ronald Reagan also. You can see, to the left we have the Chevy Corvair, which is a car with a very weird suspension, If you inflate the tires to a normal pressure, you have a risk of flipping the car over. And to the right, the Ford Pinto, which has its fuel tank in the back and a very weak link from the fuel tank to the engine, which if you go further, click. You can see the Chevy Corvair starts leaning in a corner. Click again, please. It gets hit by the car in the back. Click again. It flips, and this car sets on fire. The cost to fix these problems on the left was 30 euros in modern money, and on the right, 10 euros in modern money. On the left, there are not many numbers known about how many people died because of that, but on the right, 200 people died. Something that would cost 10 euros per car to fix. And with that, I come to an end.
Okay.